Thank you. We will be recommencing the Summary Offences Amendment Bill 2020, and I believe the member for Gembrook has the call.
Thank you very much, Acting Speaker, and welcome back. I rise on behalf of my community in relation to this and many people who have contacted me about the Summary Offences Amendment Decriminalisation of Public Drunkenness Bill 2020. And I will first of all note my support for the reasoned amendment moved by the member for Caulfield to go back to further consultation. And that further consultation has to be around speaking with the Victoria Police Association, the Ambulance Victoria and other relevant health service providers to ensure that if you're going to implement and update legislation, that legislation is reflected in the programs and availability of health programs in Victoria. First and foremost, I think it is important to note that yes, alcoholism is a health issue, and I'll say that at the very first point. And speaking to many in the Victoria Police, and going back on my time, it's probably too long ago, but going back into speaking to some people who are current police officers now, that they have options and choices that they can do at the moment currently with people who are intoxicated. And in Dandenong, I know that they work very closely with the Aboriginal cooperative down there to ensure that people, and they do treat it as a health issue in Dandenong, and I know they work very closely with the community down there. And the Victoria Police, the men and women across our state, genuinely would have a preference if I turned around to them and said, you don't have to have people who are intoxicated in your cells, would say, that's fantastic. I think that's what most would say. That would be the better option. But in saying that, that also means that you have to be very cautious with the legislation that's put in place. Because if the legislation prevents the powers for the Victoria Police to do what they need to do to protect the community and also to protect those that are in the position where they're intoxicated, there is fears through many in the police force that those powers being removed could create consequences that are negative for them and negative for others in the community. And I noted the member for Caulfield said during his contribution was in New South Wales where this happened, they have brought in the Move On laws, and I encourage the government when, hopefully, if they would support the reasoned amendment, they could go away and actually work on that of how they're going to deal with the community safety aspect at the forefront when it happens. And I will go back, as I said, speaking to the police in our areas when they're coming through and putting them inside a cell, most in those circumstances would have a preference and option if they have a person who's intoxicated and they've got a friend with them or an acquaintance or someone who can take care of that person. That's actually a preferred outcome. That is a preferred outcome. And to have someone who's so intoxicated inside the cells they know creates a risk and danger to the person and themselves, if they had a preference, they would actually much prefer them in a healthcare facility, and that may be in hospital. And I've seen circumstances where they have used the hospitals. And I noted the member for Carrum who raised the numbers, the figures around people that were intoxicated or charged with intoxication in Victoria at just over 100 per month. And I think from memory, and I'll be corrected on that, but I think it was around 100 per month, which doesn't sound a lot. And I know she said that it doesn't sound a lot. But if it's a Friday and Saturday night that most of those people are in the position of they're intoxicated, and then we find there's a concentration of those people in specific areas, and that would be generally areas along in Chapel Street in Melbourne, in some of the nightclub areas around through the Dandenong area, some parts in, you would formally say King Street, but some other parts in Melbourne as well. They would tend to be where the concentration of those numbers are. And if your health system or the programs aren't set up from the government departments to deal with that, then they're going to have to currently use the hospitals. Now, if anyone here gets an opportunity to do a tour of some of the major hospitals in Melbourne where you're going to go to on a Friday and Saturday night, they are very, very busy places. And when I was working in Paran, on the one occasion that I did have to go to hospital after getting in a fight with a person who was drunk on Chapel Street who managed to break my hand.
When you were a policeman?
When I was a policeman, it wasn't just walking down the street and had a fight. Thank you very much for correcting that. And I went down to the hospital there. The one thing I do remember was, apart from having some painkillers first up, was I got to watch the FA Cup because Arsenal played that night, because the waiting time, even as a police officer, was that long with a broken hand to get through. That means that the staff in there are working exceptionally hard. They're already overrun, and those systems haven't been updated to get them through a lot quicker. And I know that there's been some pressures on the health system. And that includes at the moment with COVID. We hear much about the splendid work that's happening in our hospitals, and we thank all those healthcare workers who have done so much for us. To add this to that current circumstances, if you're going to be bringing in people who are intoxicated in that environment, I believe would increase the risk profile that's in there, and I think it's something that needs to be considered prior to the legislation coming through. And I'll say again, Acting Speaker, I do acknowledge that public drunkenness or people who have alcohol issues are health issues. It's a health issue in our community. When I was going through this, I thought one of the best things to do was actually go out and ask some of my local police who have contacted me and said the issues that they raise. And the first one came back to me to say that they'd reach out and said, I've served in the Victoria Police for 19 years, so having some experience in this area. Removing the offence of drunk in a public place is a fatal mistake by the Andrews government. Those who are drunk, intoxicated in public are at risk of being victims of crime. You increase your chance of being a victim of crime when you're intoxicated. Being hit and killed or seriously injured by motor vehicles because you lack the sense of where you are going and how you are getting there, and people do cross the road and not at a set of lights, more chance of doing that and not seeing what's coming. Being the perpetrator of crime, we see too often a broken window on a shop front, and it's because someone, when they get the cameras out, was just drunk. It wasn't your typical criminal. It was someone who got drunk one night, walked home and smashed a window. And I think we've all seen that, or been a nuisance to members of the public going around their lawful business, and you can understand the consequences from that too. If you annoy the wrong person, that can also turn into a very violent situation very, very quickly. Those that are arrested for being drunk, in the experience of the person who's written to me, is their own protection and for their safety. And it's left to one, if they're not left to wander the streets, they're at high risk. Drunks are the most dangerous offenders to have in police cells, but most of the time they can be and are taken home and placed in the care of someone. Victoria Police already do this on many occasions where they can take them home and put them in the care of someone. And I think it's really important that we do continue to work with the police. I asked this person after this, when they said it was a fantastic tool in their response zones that they serve, and they've seen it firsthand for the last 19 years, that if they were happy for me to raise these issues on behalf of them in confidence in the Parliament. And the response was, yes, I'm happy for you to use whatever you need, because it's even crazy to consider removing it without having a proper plan. And I think that's really important to note, that that's what the police are saying. They're not saying directly no, many of them. What they're saying is you need to have a proper and formal plan in place that works through these. Another one contacted me who's a senior constable in the Transit Division, and was writing about the Andrews government changes and said does not support these new laws and believe they'll endanger the community and hospital staff. The majority of drunken people they've come into contact with are usually arrested by protective services officers at a railway station. They are often aggressive and a danger to themselves and others and the police and the PSOs. And they've asked the question, what would happen if the Victoria Police don't have that power, fail to arrest them, and that person then goes on to fall off the railway line in front of a train, or all the other circumstances, just falls and hits their head. There's a whole range of things that can happen. And I even note, Acting Speaker, you would have been out to the Code Zero calls when someone who was intoxicated has fallen and hit their head on the ground. I know the member from Melton in his career would have seen many people who the injury was caused because of the intoxication. And I think it's really important when Victoria Police are out there that they have confidence and faith that they've got the power to do what they need to do to protect the person. As I said, you can go through some areas where it is highly volatile, and I think it's something that needs to be taken into consideration. On the point around, and I understand why the government came through with this, when you're talking about those with people who are of Indigenous background and the misrepresentation, particularly in deaths in custody, which I know has been raised very commonly, not just in here but outside of here. One of the things, and I'm a firm believer in this, the deaths in custody obviously is the outcome, but the issue is where we need to get to, the core issue, the prevention, the working with people who have intoxicating issues with beer, wine, alcoholism within those communities. How do we prevent them getting to the position where they end up inside the cells? What are the precautions we can put in place to assist and offer the services for people who are in that position? I think that's really, really important, because if you want to genuinely reduce the number of deaths in custody within our Indigenous communities, then we have to have a plan to make sure that our Indigenous communities are not ending up in the prison system at the numbers they're ending up in there at the moment. And that takes a whole of government response and approach to put practices in place.